Martha Moxley walked through her quiet Greenwich neighborhood on the eve of Halloween, never imagining that this ordinary night would become the last of her life, a mystery that would haunt the town for 50 years. Martha Moxley was 17, full of energy, and loved by everyone who knew her. She lived in a quiet, affluent neighborhood of Greenwich, Connecticut, where life seemed calm and safe. The streets were lined with large trees that turned brilliant shades of red and gold every autumn. Halloween was approaching, and the town was preparing for the holiday with decorations, jack-o'-lanterns, and excited children practicing their costumes. On the evening of October 30, 1975, Martha decided to take a walk, enjoying the crisp fall air. She left her home casually, with no indication that anything was wrong. The night seemed ordinary, calm, and familiar, but it would become the last night she would ever be seen alive. Hours passed, and Martha did not return home. Her parents became worried when their calls went unanswered. The neighborhood, usually peaceful, started to feel eerie and unsettling. Families double-checked locks on doors and windows, and whispers of concern began circulating among neighbors. Police were alerted, and a search began immediately, but every effort seemed to lead to dead ends. There were no signs of a struggle, no footprints, and no evidence to suggest where she had gone. The sense of fear grew heavier with each passing hour. People began questioning whether someone they knew, someone who seemed harmless, could be responsible. The idea that danger could lurk behind the familiar faces of the community was terrifying. Investigators scoured the area for clues, but everything seemed ordinary on the surface. The neighborhood looked untouched, the streets empty except for search teams. Yet, the thought that someone had watched Martha, perhaps planned this moment, gnawed at everyone. Her disappearance was not just the story of a missing teenager. It became a symbol of something darker hiding in plain sight. Parents became protective, children were told to stay close, and the atmosphere of trust in the neighborhood began to crumble. Even seemingly innocent places, the quiet backyard, the local park, the dimly lit sidewalks were suddenly filled with suspicion and fear. As the search continued into the night, questions mounted. Why Martha? Who would want to harm her? And most chilling of all, was the person responsible? Someone they all knew, someone who had walked past them every day without raising suspicion. The uncertainty and tension settled over the community like a heavy fog. What had seemed like a safe, picturesque town was now a place of unease, where every shadow and every passerby carried a hint of menace. On that fateful October evening, the life of Martha Moxley and the sense of innocence in the town were both shattered, marking the beginning of a mystery that would haunt Greenwich for decades. A week after Martha's disappearance, the town of Greenwich was still gripped by fear and uncertainty. Families stayed close, neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, and children were warned to remain indoors. Then came the discovery that would forever change the town's history. Martha's body was found in a nearby backyard, hidden partially by overgrown hedges and forgotten landscaping. The quiet neighborhood, once a symbol of safety, now felt like a place where darkness had been patiently waiting, concealed behind white picket fences and well-tended lawns. The scene shocked everyone who arrived. The brutality of her death was clear. Martha had been struck multiple times with a heavy object. The violence was indiscriminate, almost ritualistic, yet no one had heard anything during the night. Police immediately sealed off the area and began the painstaking process of examining the crime scene. Investigators found small, almost invisible clues: a scuff on a nearby wall, an impression in the soil, and a faint smear of blood on a garden tool, but nothing substantial enough to lead to an immediate suspect. Every detail was scrutinized, every possibility explored, but the case seemed determined to remain a mystery. Rumors began to circulate among neighbors and townsfolk. Some whispered about long-standing family rivalries, jealousy, and secrets hidden beneath polite smiles. Others speculated about outsiders or strangers, but nothing fit. The eerie truth was that the killer had struck in a place so familiar, yet so private, that suspicion could have easily fallen on anyone. As the investigation dragged on, the sense of fear intensified. People realized that the perpetrator had been close, someone who knew the neighborhood intimately. Even the smallest gestures, locking doors, turning on lights, walking in pairs, could not erase the sense of vulnerability. The Moxley family, devastated and grieving, watched as the investigation unfolded with painstaking slowness. Friends and classmates of Martha were left to struggle with the idea that someone they might have known, someone they might have trusted, could commit such a violent act. The brutality of the murder, combined with the lack of immediate answers, left the town haunted. Each day without a resolution brought fresh anxiety, and the streets that had once been safe and comforting now felt alien and threatening. What had been a quiet, picturesque neighborhood was now a place where every shadow could hide a sinister presence, every quiet corner could conceal a secret. Martha's murder transformed Greenwich into a community on edge, a town forced to confront the unsettling reality that evil often lurks closer than anyone expects, hidden behind the most ordinary of facades. Years passed, and Martha Moxley's murder remained an unsolved mystery that haunted Greenwich. The case faded from the headlines, but it never left the minds of those who lived through it. The streets where she had walked became quieter, as if the town itself remembered that night. Families continued their routines, yet the unease lingered like a shadow. Over time, the story of Martha's death grew into a legend whispered during Halloween, a grim reminder of the darkness that could exist even in the most polished neighborhoods. Investigators long since retired, witnesses moved away, and the trail seemed buried beneath the passage of time, leaving only unanswered questions. Decades later, advances in forensic technology brought renewed hope to a town that had been waiting for justice for almost 50 years. Cold case detectives began reviewing old files, photographs, and evidence that had once been overlooked. Tiny clues, dismissed as irrelevant in 1975, suddenly became critical pieces of the puzzle. Fingerprints that had gone unanalyzed, hair samples, and traces of fibers were re-examined under the lens of modern science. The investigation uncovered new leads, each one more promising than the last, yet every revelation also brought frustration. Many records were missing, memories had faded, and witnesses had passed away, leaving investigators to piece together a crime committed in an era before advanced technology. Slowly, a picture of the events surrounding that night began to emerge. Evidence suggested that the killer had not acted impulsively, but had studied Martha's routines, observed her, and chosen the perfect moment to strike. This person had been close to her world, someone who could move unnoticed, someone who could blend seamlessly into the neighborhood. Investigators began to suspect that the perpetrator had been hiding in plain sight all along, taking advantage of trust and familiarity to evade detection. The realization that the killer had been so near for so long sent a chill through the team and the town alike. As the cold case team worked tirelessly, they discovered that certain clues, once dismissed as coincidences, actually pointed directly toward the perpetrator. The more they learned, the clearer it became that the answers were not in strangers or random danger, they were within the familiar faces of Martha's life. The decades of silence and uncertainty began to crack, revealing patterns of manipulation, secrecy, and hidden motives. Greenwich, once again, held its breath, waiting for the moment when the truth, buried for so long, would finally come to light. The shadow that had haunted the town for generations seemed on the verge of lifting, but no one could have predicted how shocking the revelations would be. After decades of uncertainty, the investigation into Martha Moxley's murder finally began to yield results that stunned the town of Greenwich. Forensic breakthroughs revealed evidence that had been overlooked for nearly 50 years: a faint fingerprint on the murder weapon, traces of hair under Martha's fingernails, and inconsistencies in witness statements that had gone unnoticed. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged, pointing to someone who had been deceptively close to Martha's life, someone whose presence had been taken for granted. The idea that the killer had been living in plain sight, blending into the community for decades, sent shockwaves through families, friends, and investigators alike. As detectives dug deeper, hidden relationships and long-buried grudges began to surface. Secrets that had been carefully guarded for years were suddenly exposed. Disputes over property, jealousy masked by polite smiles, and small acts of cruelty that, in hindsight, hinted at deeper darkness. The killer's ability to manipulate perception, to craft an image of innocence, became chillingly clear. Every alibi, every excuse, every gesture that had seemed ordinary now appeared to be part of a carefully orchestrated plan to avoid suspicion. The town began to understand that the crime had not been impulsive, but meticulously premeditated. Investigators reconstructed the events of that night with painstaking care. They traced Martha's steps, examined the layout of the neighborhood, and revisited evidence that had once seemed irrelevant. The timeline revealed that the killer had observed her patterns, understood when she would be alone, and selected the precise moment to commit the crime. Each revelation made the act more horrifying, the violence, the planning, and the ability to escape detection for decades. Families struggled to reconcile the image of someone they knew or thought they knew with the chilling reality of the murder. As the truth came into focus, the story of Martha Moxley transformed from a haunting cold case into a cautionary tale about trust, secrecy, and the hidden darkness that can exist behind familiar faces. The unmasking of the killer exposed a complex web of deception, manipulation, and careful concealment, showing how one person's capacity for evil could remain unnoticed for half a century. For the town, the revelation was both a relief and a new source of grief. Finally, answers had arrived, but they brought with them the realization that the shadows of that night had touched generations, leaving scars that would never fully heal. The case had been solved, but the memory of Martha and the horror of her final night would forever linger in Greenwich, a reminder of the fragile line between safety and danger. 50 years had passed since Martha Moxley's life was taken, yet the memory of that night still lingered in the town of Greenwich. On the eve of Halloween, families gathered quietly, honoring the girl whose presence had once filled the streets with light and laughter. The case, long cold and filled with unanswered questions, had finally reached resolution. The killer had been identified, decades of secrecy and deception unraveled, and justice, long delayed, was finally served. Yet the relief brought by resolution was tinged with sorrow. The years of waiting, the fear, and the lost time could never be returned, leaving a lingering ache in the hearts of those who had loved Martha. The revelation of the killer's identity shocked the town. Someone who had seemed ordinary, someone trusted, had carried out a violent act and concealed it for nearly half a century. Families struggled to reconcile the face they had known with the dark truth that had remained hidden for generations. The investigation had exposed a network of hidden grudges, jealousy, and manipulation, showing how one person could hide in plain sight while leaving a trail of fear and grief. Greenwich, once confident in its sense of security, now understood the fragility of trust, the ease with which darkness could hide behind a friendly smile, and the enduring consequences of secrecy. As the town held a quiet memorial for Martha, her story took on a symbolic weight. She became more than a victim. She became a reminder of vigilance, the importance of questioning appearances, and the persistence needed to uncover truth. Experts and investigators reflected on how long it had taken to bring justice, emphasizing that even the most well-hidden crimes can eventually be exposed with patience, dedication, and modern techniques. The memory of Martha, carried through decades of fear and uncertainty, now stood as a testament to resilience and the relentless pursuit of justice. Though the case was officially closed, the impact of Martha's murder remained. Families, friends, and neighbors who had lived through the years of suspense and doubt carried the story forward, ensuring that her life and the lessons of her tragic death would not be forgotten. The 50th anniversary was not just a time to mourn, but also a time to reflect on the power of persistence, the consequences of silence, and the enduring influence of one young life on a community. Martha Moxley's story, once shrouded in darkness and mystery, now served as both a warning and a remembrance. A chilling but vital reminder that justice, no matter how delayed, can prevail, and that the echoes of tragedy can shape a town for generations.